Here on KGRA Radio, welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Greetings. We are continuing a remarkable series of discussions that I had with JFK assassination researcher Phillip Lavelle. Phillip has been investigating the circumstances around the death of President Kennedy for decades. Although he hasn't published his research, he's done a lot of original work in the form of important interviews and a careful, very careful review of the available records. He knows the work of all the major JFK researchers and is able to put it all together in a way that makes sense to those of us who aren't up to speed on every nuance of the discussion. Phillip and I met while traveling, and it was an obvious decision to ask him to be interviewed about this. He and I have many hours of recorded interview on this subject, and I've already released the first two segments. Part one was all about Lee Harvey Oswald, and what a fascinating story that was. Part two was about the mysterious and critically important summer of 1963, which sets up the key backdrop to the shooting of President Kennedy. And we also, in that part, covered the details of the shooting itself on November 22nd, 1963. That is, what the witnesses saw, the direction of the many bullets that were fired, perhaps as many as 10, actually, but certainly much more than 3, which was the official amount from the Warren Commission. All in all, it became very clear that not only was Oswald framed, but he almost certainly didn't pull any triggers that day. That was all part two. Part three, which you are about to hear, is all about the fight over the president's body. From the grisly scene at Parkland Hospital, to guns drawn over who gets to do the autopsy, to removing the president's body from the casket, and beyond. So please join Phillip Lavelle and myself as we continue this fascinating part three of the JFK sessions. How about we'll cover the whole scene at Parkland, what those surgeons confronted in terms of what they later described as the wounds of the president having been, how the body's taken out, and then how the autopsy was completely, gave a different story. Can we do that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. The Parkland doctors, including the nursing staff that was in there, again, this in the year 1963, for the whole year, there was about 1,100 gunshot wounds brought to Parkland Hospital. So they know gunshot wounds there. So when JFK came in, they were only in life-saving mode. So they were not inspecting the body in particular for certain things, but they saw this in observation of the way they were going to try to save his life. The first thing that they had noticed, with no exceptions, was a small hole in the throat right below the Adam's apple, which all of the doctors and nurses that saw that prior to the tracheotomy said this was an entry wound. Very small wound, but it was indented inwards, and it was right at the point where they would actually do a tracheotomy anyway, so they expanded on each side. That wound, there's about 3 to 4 of the doctors and the nurses that have testified and saw that small wound. So that's where they did the tracheotomy.
And again, just to emphasize that it would be an entrance wound obviously means, again, as we were saying before, shooters from in front, behind the picket fence, grassy knoll area, presumably.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to reinforce that, at the press conference that was done about 2:30 or 3 o'clock that day, that's what the doctor said on the press when they were asked, is that there was a shot from the front and went through the throat, and that was gone out over the airways, etc. So that was something that had to be dealt with at a later point. But that's how sure they were that gunshot wound in the throat was from the front.
Okay.
And so that's it. The other big wound that they saw and were dealing with was the blowout in the lower right posterior part, the back part of the head. It was about probably the size of a baseball or a little smaller.
Wow.
There are varying degrees, but it was what would be described without exception as the exit wound from something that had hit in front. Now, they were moving along very quick trying to save his life, so they had never turned the body over and inspected and had seen the shot that was about 6 inches below the neck and about 2 inches to the right of the spinal column.
Okay.
That they had never saw, they didn't observe that. That was not in the notes because that didn't have anything to do with trying to save his life.
Right. That makes sense.
So that's the thing. But and then also again, and I make an emphasis about they were not inspecting things very closely like a pathologist would. They were just trying to save his life, and what they observed in the process of trying to save his life is what they saw. So
Right.
that's it, because we will talk about a small bullet hole right in the hairline above JFK's right eye that was just up above the hairline that they missed and never really saw. And then also there was the very small bullet hole just to the right, and it was within the actual hairline to the right ear, and that was there too. That is something that will come up.
So wait,
So
these
there,
were entrance wounds that they missed because of all
no,
the
well,
commotion?
actually, they didn't miss them because they weren't looking for them.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Right, right, right.
they weren't looking for them. So that's why you can't say they were missed, because they were just dealing with the exit wound and the wound in the throat. I mean, that's
Sure.
all they saw, and the whole thing was the head wound. Could they do anything with that? And it was so extensive, so massive. There was nothing that they could do. And
Well, and in fact, I mean, this situation had to be complete bedlam within the hospital room. You've got the president with obvious mortal wounds, massive exit wound in the back right part of his head. You've got Secret Service or guys in suits there. We want to get into that, and they're basically bossing the doctors around, as far as we can tell. So it had to be just a crazy scene.
correct. And at the press conference where they announced that JFK was dead, Malcolm Kilduff, who was the acting press secretary for that trip, was asked, well, how did he die? He said it was a simple thing of a bullet right through the brain. And he pointed essentially to where the bullet hole would have been up and above the right eye. So
Wow.
when I say that it was missed, it's sort of whenever they show that on TV, on these shows, they take out Kilduff saying that and pointing to the actual wound. That's the press's little thing that they do. You won't see that except on shows that are trying to bring out the truth, so to
Right,
speak.
right.
So that's just one of those odd things that's sort of inside baseball.
And
So
may I ask you also? This was also in that great documentary by the researcher Grodin, who you've mentioned before. And I haven't seen a lot of JFK documentaries, but I've seen one or two and maybe a couple. That was easily the best one. And in that, he interviewed the doctors who were at Parkland Hospital on the scene, like about 15 years or so after the fact. They all had a very good memory of it, and they all described the exact same thing. And they all pointed to the right back of their head, massive exit wound, right parietal lobe.
correct. All of them said exactly the same thing
Right.
because they all saw the same thing.
Absolutely. So, from that scene, can you describe then what happens to the body of the president, and moving on then to the autopsy?
Yeah, they wrap the body in a couple of sheets, and they get uh, the most expensive, ornate casket that they can from the O'Neill Funeral Home that is there, that shows up, and they put the president in that casket, and That's all he's got is the sheets. He's got one sheet wrapped around the head, one sheet is wrapped around the rest of the body. That's very important because that isn't how the body arrives
Okay.
at Bethesda Hospital. So that's important to know that. They then take, after the Secret Service wins the battle of the body, it gets to Air Force One, where coincidentally,
Well, can I just
some
stop you because the Battle of the Body? Um, was there an argument at the time by the doctors to keep the president's body in Dallas? Was this an issue?
no, that was not
That was not an issue.
that I'm aware of by the
Okay.
doctors. Some of them were witness to it. It was only this Dr. Rose, who was the coroner, pathologist, autopsy doctor.
Hmm.
He was the one that was there, and him and his office were making the point that by Texas law they had to do the autopsy there
That's what it
before
was.
the body
Okay.
left.
Okay. So there was a struggle here, and the argument was we need to keep the president's body here so we can do an autopsy under Texas state law.
Correct.
And they
Correct.
lost that argument, obviously.
Correct. But that's because guns were drawn. The actual casket was on a sort of little hand truck, and there was a pushing match going back and forth.
Wow.
Uh, it was apparently a very ugly scene, as described by a couple of the doctors, which was apparently well documented in William Manchester's book that he had wrote in 1967.
Okay. Wow.
And so
Interesting.
that was very, I mean, that's well documented there. But, I mean, people could make the argument this is the President of the United States. It was important. I think LBJ has always said, he always hides behind Jackie's skirt on a lot of these things. It says she wanted the body going back.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And, when it's convenient, he would say that. So, but in the meantime, when this battle was going on at the Parkland Hospital for the body,
Hmm.
LBJ or someone with a lot of authority that was already on Air Force One, and LBJ was already there because he had left probably 15 minutes after JFK was pronounced dead, and he's out at Air Force One, and they're tearing up some various seats that they had to in order to be able to put the casket there. So the plan was in place that body was planning to come on Air Force One. And
15 minutes after the president is shot, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, the new president, is having Air Force One's seats ripped out to accommodate a casket. So they knew exactly what they were going to do.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. And when we say it was LBJ, it was someone that was on that plane with authority. And there was one guy on that plane at the time that was the president of the United States then, and that was LBJ. So
Right.
you have to assume it was someone not in a lesser capacity that was suddenly deciding, hey, why don't you tear up those seats?
Yes,
Because
indeed.
I think that we're going to have a casket here shortly.
Exactly. Amazing.
So,
Okay.
yep. So that's the casket arrives there and is put on. Apparently, it has trouble because it's so wide and it's very heavy. The casket itself reportedly is about 1,100 pounds, so it is heavy. And when you see any clips of these guys getting it up the stairs on the plane there, it is heavy and it is tough. I believe they had to knock off one of the handles or something in order to fit in the door. And so they, with some trouble, they actually got it on the plane in the place where they had the seats taken out, and that was that for then. But things are happening very quick.
Yeah, I want to ask you. So the president was shot at 12:30 that afternoon. He's rushed to Parkland Hospital. How long was he at the hospital, and when was his body loaded in the casket to Air Force One? Can you? describe that?
Uh, I believe that got to the actual plane at about 1:20 p.m. I mean, let me see, it was 1:20 or no, it may have been about. Boy, that's a good question. Well, let's just call it about 1:30,
All right. But
and
roughly speaking, about an hour.
from the time from the actual shots being
Right.
fired, and he was officially pronounced dead at 1 p.m. So the battle was going on there, and apparently it was a very it's very short, that I know this from experience.
Right.
From Parkland Hospital to the airport is 2 miles. I mean, it's very short.
Okay, it's
So
right there.
so it's a very quick ride. I mean, I'll say, especially with the police escorts that they had and all that, they were probably leaving the Parkland Hospital lot and getting out to the plane there in 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay,
It
but
was that
just in general, I mean, this is unbelievably rapid, right? The president's shot, he's pronounced dead, and within roughly 30 minutes from that point, he is being entered in a casket to onto Air Force One. That's unbelievable.
correct.
That's
Yep,
unbelievable.
yeah. The idea was, I mean, Dr. Rose was all set to do that autopsy right there and then, because they had all of the facilities there at Parkland Hospital. So that's where he wanted to do it, and he wanted to do it right then,
Right.
by law.
Okay.
And of
I'm
course, he
glad
was prevented.
I'm glad we discussed this part. So then now the president's brought onto Air Force One. Anything else that's significant here? Isn't there the moment where Johnson's being sworn in, and there's that famous moment where he's looking over and winking?
At the Texas congressman that was on there.
Right.
I forget that guy's name, but
Right.
yes, it looks exactly like you described it. It was a wink, and it got caught on camera where Johnson turned around, almost looked like a smile on Johnson's turned face, and then the smile on Johnson with the wink.
Yeah.
So it was quite interesting
Yeah.
on that. But that's just a side note. No
Right.
one's gonna convict LBJ or anyone on that. But
Right.
it was very interesting. But it was important. All of those. There was only a few minutes of where that casket was left totally alone without any of the Kennedy people being around. According to Manchester's book, JFK's aide, General McHugh, refused to go up to the swearing in ceremony, and he stayed with the casket. So if that's true, that left a very short time, and it was about an 8 to 10 minute time frame where the two Secret Service guys that were in JFK's car, that's Kellerman and Greer, were on Air Force One, and I believe that's when they moved the body and took it out of the casket and put it apparently in the cargo luggage area. And probably the big concern was they thought that Dr. Rose may show up with Dallas police and demand the body back. So that may have been a preemptive strike there. That's as best that we can figure why they made that move fast.
So they took the president's body out of the 1,100-pound casket, put
Correct.
it into a different container.
Well, no, I think just in the sheets, just in the luggage compartment area.
You
I
mean
mean,
just
that
wrapped
there
in
was no other
sheets
place to put them.
with nothing else, just wrapped in a sheet or two?
Nothing else. You will notice on one of the autopsy photos where they show the back and they're showing the back wound, there's what looks like a bunch of scrapes and all that on his back. I'll bet it's from that ordeal of him being probably on his back in the cargo hold.
My God.
And that would probably explain that. But it's some unusual marks and scrapes that you can see, and that is a legitimate autopsy photo. They were
So
just showing the back wound.
the logic would be if Dr. Rose and the Dallas police come to reclaim the body, they would what? Give them the casket, an empty casket?
That may have been the plan.
Wow.
That may have been the plan.
Okay.
It's hard to get
Right. We're
inside
just
their heads, but
hypothesizing
they
here.
were very concerned about what would happen, and that's about the best
Okay.
reason we can come up with why that. Because I think the plan was to take the casket and to take it to Walter Reed first for the sanitation operation there, and that, as you'll find out, didn't actually happen.
Okay.
So
Well, let's continue on here then. So you've got the president's empty casket where his family thinks he is, where Jackie thinks he is. And then you've got the president actually wrapped in some sheets in the cargo area of Air Force One.
correct, in the back starboard part. That's as best that they could figure, about the only place, because they were doing a luggage transfer over. That is why they were able to do it, because they were actually transferring luggage, LBJ's luggage from Air Force Two over to Air Force One and LBJ's people. You would think that LBJ could maybe wait a couple hours before really thinking Air Force One was his own.
This seems shocking to me. I mean, actually disgusting.
It's amazing what these people were doing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. All right, so please continue. I probably shouldn't interrupt. So they're on their way and they arrive and they land
Yeah.
where? Where do they land?
Well, yeah. Well, actually, what they're doing is, of course, they have the swearing in ceremony that they have. So that takes a few minutes. And then the Kennedy people that were allowed on Air Force Two were sort of keeping a vigil at the casket, sort of an Irish wake in a sense, and mourning this horrible thing that occurred. So they were with the casket the whole time from there on. So,
But the casket was empty.
yeah, they were with the casket, of which they thought the body was in there,
Right.
which you reasonably would expect. But anyway, as this goes on, you will find out that for sure he wasn't in there. But we now have the flight is 2 hours and 15 minutes to Andrews Air Force Base, and the
In D.C.
correct, in D.C. and the Air Force One tapes. You could tell researchers have discovered some of them are spliced and altered, some are missing, some are still classified. But of what you could get out and what you could piece together from some other memos that have come, the original point was to take the body to Walter Reed. And there was discussion going on between the Situation Room at the White House and the Secret Service guy, Kellerman, on the flight of how the body was going to go to the autopsy. One set of people wanted by helicopter, the other by car or by limo. And you could see this thing going back and forth. And you can really tell when you piece together stuff, you can find out which one of the Secret Service agents were involved. And Kellerman and Greer absolutely were involved. They're important because they were the ones. Greer was driving JFK's limo at the time, and Kellerman was in the front seat. So they're important. But the one thing that was this 1,100-pound casket caused a little concern with the weight of it. So that's why the helicopter was a little bit of a sketchy thing. It's a very long, involved thing which had gone on back and forth, but they finally decided. Uh, and Jackie threw a monkey wrench into this with stating she wanted the autopsy to be a Navy autopsy at Bethesda. And certainly at some point, the conspirators knew the body was going to end up at Bethesda, but I think that they were planning to do the work on the head at the Walter Reed Hospital.
Right, but
That's some
Jackie
speculation.
said, I want it immediately to go to Bethesda. I mean, is it
Yeah.
fair to
Should,
assume she had no confidence in LBJ's people, obviously, and wanted to make sure that she had more confidence in the U.S. Navy? Kennedy had been in the U.S. Navy, that type of a connection?
right. And she did. A couple of different people went to her and said, why don't you go get freshened up and change your clothes? I mean, there's blood all over it. I mean, please. To both of the individuals that said it, I think one was Dr. Berkeley, the other one of JFK's aides, and she said the same thing. No, I want them to see what they did to my husband. And that's just the way she was putting
I
it. And that's
want
what they
them to see what they did. So she's
did.
not buying any. Well, the lone gunman theory hadn't been put out there yet, as far as I know, in the media, but she already knew.
I have a feeling she
Yeah.
already knew.
Yeah.
I have a feeling she already knew, and I
Yeah.
think she told that to Bobby when he first got on
Right.
the plane. But that's the one thing you could tell by the Air Force One tapes. They wanted to separate now, and this is everything is on the fly from this point on because moving the body out of the casket caused some trouble. And now things were on the fly. And the idea was
Sure.
to separate Jackie from the casket. And the plan was, as they told the Air Force tape, the plane was going to pull in, and the port side is what everyone saw with TV cameras. Bobby Kennedy getting off with Jackie and the casket being brought out. That's the port side, the left
The left
side
side, yeah.
from the front. They were asking for a scissor lift of sort and to prepare for Jackie to be taken off the right side of the plane. And that's what they were stating on the tapes, that they had wanted a way to get Jackie off the right side of the plane in the darkness, I guess under the auspices that she will not have press people and it'll be more of a private thing. I think the real reason that they wanted that was that's when they intended to move the body that was over on the starboard side of the cargo hold. And apparently that's exactly what did happen. The one that they had planned for Jackie and for other of the JFK folks to go to the White House by helicopter. And the other monkey wrench then was Jackie would not leave the casket. Of course, she thinks she's not leaving the body.
Right.
So that's a problem, but they are getting that solved because they have already called in tape show, some interviews, affidavits, etc. There were helicopter folks that were waiting in the wings in the dark to come and pick up whatever they were supposed to pick up, and then to move that from the right side, the starboard side of the plane, which was in total darkness as far as the TV cameras go. By the time they arrived, the sun had just set, and most people have seen the quick LBJ speech that he did when he got off the plane, asking for prayers for the country, and that's all that he can do at this time.
We're going to take a very quick break. When we return, you will hear more of my conversation with Phillip Lavelle, JFK researcher, on the details of what happened to the body of President Kennedy in the aftermath of the assassination of November 22nd, 1963. I'm Richard Dolan, and you are listening to KGRA Radio. Welcome back to my interview with JFK researcher Phillip Lavelle as we continue our discussion on what happened to President Kennedy's body after his assassination on November 22nd, 1963. Let's just keep continuing here. So they land, the casket goes in one direction, and JFK's body goes where?
It goes into a helicopter from the starboard side of the plane, goes in the helicopter, and is flown from there to the back parking lot of the Bethesda Hospital.
Okay.
Okay, now that's, by various affidavits, witness statements, seeing them, this is all very clearly documented.
So the president's body is brought to Bethesda as Jackie wanted?
Yes, because now she's going. LBJ wanted her,
and so they've got to find a way. Right? She can't be there so they should have kept the body in the casket all along, right? Because now they have to go through this little shenanigans to separate her long enough from the casket.
Right, because there are three documented entries in the military records at Bethesda of the body arriving.
Right.
And as it was well put, no conspirator would have ever thought of this crazy thing. No one would ever thought. That is why this is on the fly. That is why when the body arrives and gets there at 6:35 by helicopter, they had the Gawler Funeral Home hearse out there that came, and that's apparently at some point they had put it into a body bag, and then the body bag went into a cheap silver metal shipping casket that they would do for Vietnam vets coming back from the war, etc. So you have a cheap casket there, and then you have the documentation of that casket. Actually, it arrived, probably it landed at 6:30 in the parking lot, the helicopter. The hearse picked up the actual body. It went into the casket there, and then was brought to the loading dock, and that's where it was documented by the military records that the body arrived in a silver shipping casket at 6:35.
Okay.
But back at the plane, remember Jackie, Bobby, Dr. Berkeley, that's the personal doctor of JFK. They are in a gray ambulance that many people have seen on TV, and that's being driven by Admiral Galloway, who is in charge of the entire Bethesda complex, and he's the driver. And he's driving this body, or I'm sorry, he's driving the casket to Bethesda Hospital.
With Bobby and Jackie.
Correct.
Oh my God.
Correct. So that's where, then you have the entry of some FBI agents and staff, because that arrives at 6:55. And for reasons that they never explained, it remained outside for about 12 minutes, because the actual entry is 7:07 p.m., where they then brought in the casket and put it in the room there where it would await the autopsy, which was scheduled for about 8 o'clock.
So the real question is, were they must have been able to separate Jackie and Bobby from the casket long enough to have this ruse that they had taken the president's body out of the casket, I assume.
Yep. And also Kellerman was also in the car in this gray ambulance that had the casket. He was with them because there was actually one person had to sit on another person's lap. That's how crowded it was.
My God.
In this, and Kellerman's role must have been, under no circumstances is he ever to allow anyone to open up that casket.
Correct. That had to be
his key. thing.
My
That
God.
couldn't happen.
Not
And
that
it did.
he would not necessarily have known all the details of what was going on, I would imagine.
Kellerman?
Right.
Kellerman probably knew a lot of them. He probably knew a lot.
Okay.
He had to have been in the loop on this whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
he had to have been in the loop, and so he's also in that ambulance, and they drop off Jackie and Bobby, and I think that they actually go up to the 17th floor, where they will be up there during this whole time. The casket is brought in. The reason that's important is you have one of the X-ray technicians who's holding in his hands some of the skull X-rays of JFK in his hands that were already done when he sees Bobby and Jackie walking in the actual bottom part of the hospital there. And so, meaning the body just allegedly just arrived in that
Exactly.
casket, yet he's already got X-rays in his hands, meaning they've already started things.
How did
And
they handle this situation? How did this all go down? And also, you've got to think Jackie's getting her way. She's getting her husband's body brought to Bethesda where reliable, in her mind, reliable people will be looking at it. And obviously that did not happen. But just describe this whole situation.
yeah.
Here they're walking into the building. What do the technicians do?
What they were just following. They just took note. The technician has no idea of putting things together there. Like, hey, they just arrived. He doesn't know that they just arrived with an empty casket.
Right. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
so
There had
that's
to be
the
other
and
people on the
really
scene.
For the most part, from everything that we can gather, both Bobby and Jackie went up to the 17th floor and really weren't involved in any of the other stuff for the rest of the night there at the hospital.
So they were kept away from the president's body from that point onward, and possibly just accepted that the technicians and the experts were working on the body, were
Right,
examining
and
the body.
Bobby's up there consoling Jackie. Now, I'm sure if
Okay,
Jackie wasn't there, Bobby probably would have been like to have been down in the autopsy room, maybe watching what was going
sure, but
on
he wasn't able to.
stuff. But yeah, the circumstances were that I thought that he thought his best place was up there with Jackie.
Okay, so let's get into the examination and the sanitization, as you put it, of the president's body. Can we go there?
Yes, again, that's where we're at. At one point, when it first arrived at 6:35, because of depositions taken in the mid 90s by the Assassinations Record Review Board, there were people that took photos of the body as it came in before the body was sanitized,
Okay,
and because they have two or three doctors on the record stating there was a hole in the back of the head, and just like the Parkland Hospital doctors had described the wounds, these doctors described it when it very first came in, and that's what the photographers and some of the people who developed some of the film also testified to. So there was honest autopsy photos that were taken at Bethesda immediately, and they were taken. So that was probably done within 5 or 10 minutes, probably 6:40, 6:45.
should we
So
assume that
that's
these are gone forever, these photographs, or do they exist somewhere?
a couple of them exist because a couple of them have cropped up. That's another story in itself that may
Interesting.
take too much time.
Mm,
But there's dozens that were testified to that were taken that are missing.
okay.
And the ones in the record that normally people see on the internet and they've seen in books. They were all taken, but that was after Dr. Hume. And there's two witnesses, Ed Reed and a Gawler Funeral Home employee, Tom Robinson, who's observed Hume before 7 o'clock, about 6:45, 6:50, sawing on JFK's head and removing enough of the area to remove the brain. And so that was actually seen by the witnesses, and that's uh, pretty clear. Hume is back there by himself. He then shoos them out of the room, and but they are at least there, see him working on the head, and there's so the photos that you've seen that are showing JFK autopsies photos, they are generally all of them that were taken after this work was done. And that
Okay,
includes,
so we got to just stop right there. I have a lot of questions here. So the sawing of the head, I'm not an expert in any of this, but I've got to assume this is not a standard thing that you would do in an autopsy. So what is the purpose of
no,
doing this at all? And then secondarily, right, we've all seen these images of, or at least they're out there, of the dead body of JFK, and his head is, well, it's intact as far as we can see,
oh,
right?
yeah,
So
you mean the back of the head photos,
well,
right?
actually, there's pictures
Yeah,
of him on staring straight up.
yeah, that's the death stare photo.
Exactly. So
Yeah, and his face looks
intact,
completely intact.
right?
Yep.
So
You
what's
will
going on with all
notice,
of this?
yeah, you will. I believe it's the death stare photo that there's a saw cut that's right in the hairline, a little V that is done that you can clearly see in one or two of those photos.
Okay, okay.
None, zero of the Parkland doctors that look at that photo ever saw that. They never saw that there. So that was done. And when I said there's a saw cut in the hairline, a little V,
Mm-hmm.
that was taking out that bullet hole. That's
Okay.
where that bullet hole in the hairline up above the right eye was.
So this had
And
to be there had to be two bullets that hit him in that part of the head because one made an exit wound and presumably
yeah,
was not in his body.
that's the one that was over near the right ear.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that was the one. That was the bullet
Unbelievable.
hole over near the right ear, of which was seen by the aide James Jenkins that was doing all of the assistance for the autopsy doctors. They're turning the body over. His main job. You had gotten back with the good question. What was Dr. Humes doing sawing the head?
Right.
That was normally the aide's job, James Jenkins. What you do is it's called a skull cap. You take the top of the skull off, essentially, in order to take the brain out.
And the reason
That,
for
that's
this
a
is why? Just the brain would decompose very rapidly, or I mean, if the
oh,
body's dead,
I
why
mean I
preserve?
mean, if you're going to do an autopsy on a person, you always remove the brain.
I
That's a
see.
standard procedure.
Okay.
Do the skull cap, take out the brain, and then just like putting a hat back on, the skull and the hair, everything goes right back into place,
Okay.
so that when you're having a viewing, you don't really see anything.
I see. Okay. Thank
Yep.
you for explaining that.
Right. So that's what Dr. Hume is doing. He has to get that brain out to remove the bullets showing the frontal shots and to remove that from the brain. And he does that and he puts the brain back in the head.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow.
that I mean,
Wow.
because at the autopsy, that's what is done. It was in a tremendously sloppy, hurried, quick job, as you can imagine. As the one aide said, Gerald Custer, who was going to school at Bethesda there to learn how to do all this stuff, Dr. Humes was in charge of the administration there, he had said not only had he never seen or heard of him doing an autopsy, he had never seen him in the morgue before. So Dr. Humes is down there on orders to be doing this on the fly. And I think the highly experienced people at Walter Reed, they were planning on doing this over there.
So
But
the implication's pretty evident, but let's just state it. Humes is put on the spot not because of his experience or ability, because clearly he wasn't nearly as capable as any number of other surgeons or forensic pathologists, but because he would be considered reliable and he would do what he's told.
he's a military guy that'll do exactly what he's told.
Yeah.
That's the
Right.
bottom line.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's continue here.
Okay, and so that's that is an important part there. When you see some of the photos, it looks like JFK's head is all mangled up in the top right portion of the head. Now, the photos that you and I are talking about that are in the record showing a completely intact right rear of the head, that was sold for that to take out the exit blast from this. But the other part of the right front part of the head and that flap that comes out over and above the right ear, that was all sold as being damaged by one bullet. And
And
it was a
also,
tough sell. It was a tough sell.
yeah, and I just want to emphasize this. I think I've got this right. There are photos, as you were just referring, to the back of the president's head, the back of John F. Kennedy's head. And these photos, my understanding, were not released until the mid 1970s, and they show, as I think you were just indicating, an intact back of the head. So no blowout in the back right section of the head. His hair's all there. And this was the scene that I will never forget in the documentary by the researcher Grodin at that time, where he's interviewing the doctors at Parkland Hospital and showing them that photograph. And they're all saying, that's not what I saw.
Correct.
Every one of
Yeah.
them. So the implication clearly is that these photographs had been completely faked and altered.
Totally fake.
Yeah.
And all.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to make that
Yeah.
explicit. Yeah.
Yeah, we are probably getting ahead of ourselves in there, but
Okay,
yeah, no,
sorry about
that's
that.
just a good enough time. This
Yeah.
is just good enough time to state that because we're in the autopsy room now. They had taken skull X-rays, either 5 or 6. One of the guys said 5, and then another time he said 6. The other doctor said 6. There's only 3 skull X-rays in the archives today, and the experts that have looked at that said they are all copied X-rays that have been altered. There is no original unaltered X-rays in the record. So and I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, but
Well, that's very
what was going
important.
on here at the autopsy was to change what these people. There was 35 witnesses that were actually watching the autopsy, the public autopsy.
Mm-hmm.
And they're seeing this, and what had occurred is, and the witness that I've spoke to several times, and he finally came out and went public in 2013 on the 50th anniversary, but his name is in the record. That's James Jenkins. That was the 20-year-old autopsy technician at
Okay.
the Naval Hospital there, whose job was to do skull caps and to remove brains.
I see. Yeah.
And he had said when the autopsy had started, they moved the body, which is it's a long story how they got the body back into the ornate casket, but they were able to get it back in. And then he's wheeled into the autopsy room. There's 35 witnesses.
So this is all, everything you've just described is prior to the autopsy.
Is prior to the autopsy.
Okay, that's
Yep.
really important. How long do you think that whole process took, by the way?
It was about 85 minutes where that they had to do all of this. They had to do this work. They took, they removed the brain, removed the evidence of the bullets from the front. You'll see the one photo. Remember where the tracheotomy was?
Yes, yes, yes.
It's a mangled piece of flesh where it looked like a inexperienced doctor rummaging around looking for a bullet. And that's there. The Parkland doctors had testified that once once they left the Parkland hospital, the tracheotomy sort of went back the way it originally was, and all that was left there was a small little bullet entry hole. And then on each side of the small bullet hole there, for maybe a half an inch each way, was the tracheotomy incision.
Yes. Yeah.
But it had gone back to the way it was, and it was very clean. The photos that you and I have seen of this mangled tracheotomy there, that was someone rooting around for a bullet.
Right, right. That concludes part 3 of the JFK sessions with researcher Phillip Lavelle. In this part, Phillip discussed the key events immediately following the assassination of the president, including the arrival at Parkland Hospital, the assessment of his wounds by the experienced attending physicians, all of whom, by the way, described a massive exit wound in the back of the head. The ensuing fight over the body and who would perform the autopsy, the immediate removal of the president's body for the flight to D.C., the incredible removal of his body from the casket, LBJ's infamous wink faking JFK's wounds, all of this prior to the actual autopsy. That's what we covered in this part. We still have the autopsy itself to discuss, and let's not forget the infamous Warren report, the CIA, and of course, the new president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. We have all of that to cover. Hope to have you with us. Thanks for listening. Because of the nature of social media everywhere now, the presence of this and similar programs I've created are never secure. You never know when the hammer may come down. That's why I encourage you to visit my website, Richard Dolan Members, where I produce much more content like what you've just heard. Hope to see you there. Meanwhile, let's remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other. Later.